Welcome to Stepsero. Modern work is a lot. Let's take it one conversation at a time. My guest today is Alex McCann, co-founder of Rumbo, an AI career coaching platform, and the writer behind Still Wondering, a newsletter on careers and the future of work with over 18,000 subscribers. In this episode, we get into why so many people make career decisions on autopilot, why the debate between following your passion and following your skills is a lot more complicated than it sounds, and some honest reflections on Alex's entrepreneurial path. Let's get into it. Alex, welcome to Stepsero. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks for having me.
Alex, you're the founder of Rumbo, which operates in the AI career coaching category. And you built it on the premise that so many people lack an understanding or a good enough understanding of themselves. They pick a job or a career based on salary and status and similar metrics, but they usually ignore or neglect, for lack of better words, what is actually really good for them, what fires them up. And I know that you've had many interviews and conversations in the process of building Rumbo, and I know that you're very passionate about the topic. I see you writing everywhere on LinkedIn, on Substack. You have a phenomenal blog. Can you give me a sneak peek into what you saw maybe early in your career or along these conversations, which eventually led you to do what you do?
Yeah, no, great question. So I think the thing that became clear to me early on in this project, and probably earlier in my career as well, but particularly as I started on this journey of kind of rethinking traditional career advice, helping people find more meaningful work, was that so many people are operating on autopilot and making really, really important life decisions based on cultural narratives, the expectations of others, applying to jobs that people with their degrees typically apply for. And I think that, what I really wanted to do with this project and, this kind of phase of my life really is understand how we can make quality career advice more accessible so that more people can take a step back and really analyze these decisions that they're making, because it's really what you choose to do with your career is one of the biggest decisions you have to make in your life. And so we want to help people get more information as they make this decision and better understand themselves, better understand their kind of passions, their interests, their skills and capabilities, and also, what opportunities there are for them in the marketplace, where there are gaps, where there's opportunities for somebody with their specific skill set, with their specific interests to address. So yeah, I think that to answer your question, it's the thing that I saw the most when I was speaking to people who were struggling with career uncertainty is just a complete lack of awareness of where to start, such a unfamiliarity with the conversations that, you and I are both quite familiar with, but for the average person, it's not. It feels very foreign and very unfamiliar. So yeah.
And I mean, you hinted at that. There's all sorts of advice on what you should do and what you should not do. And I've had this my whole life since I was a kid. You should do this, you should pursue this career, you should pursue that. And in hindsight, they all came from a good place, but none of them were actually accurate. And look, same happens these days. Nobody has a crystal ball, but there's plenty of unsolicited advice out there in the internet. And at least in my opinion, but I think we share the same opinion, you should always take any advice with a grain of salt, especially coming from people who don't really know you that well, right? Look, this being said, suggestions basically run along a spectrum. They go from follow your passion to do what you're good at. And I know that you've written about this. I'm curious about your perspective. You seem to have a more nuanced approach. Can you give me an insight into what you think of that?
Yeah. So I think that there's a couple of things to speak about here. The first is that, yeah, as you mentioned, so many people are just flooded with advice. You should do this, you should do that. Much of it comes from social media. And I think the issue generally with that type of advice is that they have no context. The people giving advice have no context or understanding as to your specific situation. People can talk about like fundamental truths and, principles. And I think that's one thing. But then when people start giving specific advice for something like a career decision, which is such a complex decision with so many variables, I think is really hard to give good quality general advice. I think that the good quality advice in its nature is specific and personalized. And so that's why I think that generally I'm fairly skeptical of a lot of the stuff we see online. Not all of it, some of it's good. And as I say, there are some people that have really kind of nailed the principles and the fundamentals. But yeah, so I think that, so there's that. And then I think on your kind of the second part of your question, which talks about, the advice on do what you love versus do what you're good at. I think people need to learn to have an honest conversation with themselves about the phase of life they're in, their circumstances, their capacity to take on risk. If you're 16, 17 years old and, you're the best, football player in your school or your college or whatever, and you've got, access to, the industry and you want to be a footballer, like that's the time to have a go at doing the thing that you love. Chances are it's not going to work out just statistically, but there's a time and a place to take risks. And when you're young, usually that's a good place to start. If you're like 40 years old and, you're going to quit your job and try and become a professional footballer, it's not going to work out for you. And so I think it sounds obvious, but just having an honest conversation with oneself and understanding, okay, these are the commitments, these are my responsibilities, this is my capacity to take on risk. How far along on that spectrum should I sit? If you're in a place where you've got some savings or you don't have as many responsibilities, then maybe you should try and optimize for enjoyment, optimize for doing the thing that you love. If it's the case that actually, you need to put food on the table and you've got people to provide for, then perhaps you should optimize more for what am I going to get paid for? What am I really good at? So yeah, it's just completely circumstantial. It really just depends on where you are at your life.
I'd like to quote something that you wrote in your blog, Still Wondering, on Substack, because I thought that you pretty much hit the nail on the head. And I wrote it down. It's just a couple of lines. You wrote, "You cannot outwork people who find the work natural. For them, the hours don't feel like hours. The thinking happens in the shower and on walks. The hard problems get worked on in the background while they're doing something else. And the answer arrives later without anyone having to force it." I thought it was brilliant. You're basically describing how, in a way, hard work is super important, but at the same time, it has to be something you are, if not passionate about, at least very, very much interested in. And it sort of settles the conversation between, should I follow my passion? Should I do what I'm good at? Of course, there is no easy answer. There is no black or white answer. And it reminded me, funny enough, of an interview that I listened some time ago. It must have been a few months back, about Kobe Bryant, right? And he's considered one of the best basketball players ever. I'm not into basketball, but I know who Kobe Bryant is. He is known for this so-called Mamba mentality, this winning, hardworking mindset. There is an entire library of videos on YouTube everywhere about him outworking anyone else and even recovering from this devastating injury in record time, pretty much. The point is that in one interview, he's asked about passion, and he says something along the lines of loving everything about the game. People see him working harder than anybody, and they focus on the work ethics, but sometimes they miss the fact that he knew, since he was, his own words, about 2 years old, that he was made for playing basketball. And he says things like he loves the sound of the ball hitting the net, the smell of a new pair of sneakers, the noise that the shoes make on the court, And it made me somehow think of exactly what you wrote, that you cannot outwork people who found the work natural. So if you just go with what you're good at, if you're just focusing on this is a niche in the market that pays really well, that might not be enough. There has to be a little more to that to figure out what makes your day pleasant, what can somehow help you get consistent over time, what fires you up in the morning, and so on and so forth. So it's just a small reference to something you wrote that made my brain fire in all directions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the caveat there is that the Kobe Bryant example is rare. It's rare that somebody knows from age 2 what they want to do. It's also, maybe he knew from age 2, but there's plenty of examples of people that wanted to be a basketball player from age 2 and then grew up to be, 5'7", and, and it just wasn't going to happen for them. So there's a certain amount of luck involved. There's also, other factors that were working in his favor. But yeah, I do think that there's something in there. The other thing that I think is probably worth mentioning as well is that I don't think that what you enjoy and what you're good at I think they're inextricably linked. I think that you go through these kind of feedback loops, and if he's playing since he was a kid, he'll enjoy the feeling of improvement. He'll enjoy the progress that he sees. He'll enjoy being good at something. You tend not to love things that you're really, really bad at. I mean, there's something about the beginner stage of something where you see improvement, and that's enjoyable. But something that you're kind of inherently bad at, it's typically quite hard to enjoy. So, to kind of, I think the article you're referencing, I mentioned Scott Galloway talking about the idea that, if you find something that you're really good at and it pays you well, like generally you'll learn to enjoy that thing because you learn to enjoy what comes from being good at something that people are willing to pay you for.
That's right. And I know that you base also your work at Rumbo on this framework that is called the career fulfillment triangle. So indeed, there's many factors that play into this, right? People tend
Mm-hmm.
to oversimplify. And of course, like you said, we're talking about the 0.0001%. I'm a big fan of Ikigai, which is this framework, so to speak, aimed at finding your reason for being. And both frameworks, the career fulfillment triangle and Ikigai, they somewhat overlap on certain aspects.
Very similar.
Very similar, right? I wonder though, on a personal level, if I may ask, do you have anything like an inner compass or a thought that you use yourself to pretty much remind yourself of where you're heading? So I know that you've had quite a journey, right? You were into engineering, then you tried music for a while, then you're into Rumbo, you tried many different things. How is it that you keep an eye on the prize?
Interesting. I think I have this mission now, which I said at the start, which is rethinking traditional career advice and helping people find meaningful work. I think that's a really kind of interesting problem for me. I think that the parts of that problem that I enjoy are that it's broad. There's so many different domains in which this problem shows up. That excites me. So to kind of answer your question, simply scale of impact is something that I'm kind of moving towards. I also think that there's something quite interesting for me about doing something that's a bit like cutting edge, a little bit innovative. It interests me that there's this extraordinary large, complicated system, the education system, that is so unfit for purpose in preparing young people for work and lives. And I think it's just, sometimes it's baffling to me that somebody hasn't done something sooner to fix this problem. I know that it's hard, but there's something to me that like working on a really interesting problem that's cutting edge, that's innovative, and it feels like you can make progress in is something that's really interesting. To be honest, that's actually the first time I've been asked that question. There's of course other things, like that people are willing to pay to have this problem solved is important. One of the things that I really like about this project is that it started with me just speaking one-to-one with hundreds and hundreds of people that were going through this problem until I felt that I noticed patterns and could scale the advice so that we could build frameworks around how we give advice. The platform itself is really about giving individual and personalized advice. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I'll have to think more about that. But yeah, good question.
Yeah, look, I'm not expecting a straightforward answer. It's $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
Is it okay that I dig a little bit deeper on your lived experience and yourself?
Yeah, absolutely.
You, allow me to say, are building a product around essentially understanding yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you are in this trajectory towards scale and helping other people do the same. Do you believe you got to a really good understanding of yourself? And have you seen an evolution compared to how you did understand yourself a couple of years ago compared to today?
Yeah, definitely. And that was through the help of a career coach. So I went through the process of career coaching, and it was that experience or partially it was that experience that led me to reflect on the career advice that I'd had at various points of my education and career. And, there was such a stark contrast between the advice that I got at school compared to the advice that I got through this kind of professional accredited career coach. And so, yeah, he really helped me work through over, I don't know, we were working together for about 6 months, work through a load of exercise to help me better understand myself, to test things, to experiment, to do kind of conducted and controlled experiments. So yeah, I think that like, it's always easy to post rationalize. And I think that I can make sense of a lot of the decisions I made now looking backwards. At the time, I think it felt much more intuitive and I was kind of just vibing it, to be honest. But now I think that I have enough self-understanding and also the skills to, if there were to be another kind of big life or career pivot that I make, I know what to look for. I know how to approach that decision now.
Look, I think we don't know each other that well, but looking at your journey, what you're building, the intention behind it, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people any age at any stage of their career that are looking up to you and they're following your content and are interested in what you have to say.
Hmm.
Was there any really hard part, maybe the hardest part that nobody warned you about, that somehow surprised you the most about building Rumbo?
The hardest part about building Rumbo has been.
Maybe this could help Alex to put it into context. The reason I ask you this is because sometimes, you know, we we look at people who are either very successful, very outspoken on certain topics. We only see the
Mm,
glamorous part, right?
yeah.
We only see the cool stuff. Or that guy made it, or Alex is so knowledgeable about modern work and the future of work. And I think it would help also listeners and people looking at your content figure out, okay, there's good and bad parts about being an entrepreneur. So I'm curious about your own experience and something that maybe surprised you. It doesn't have to be the worst thing ever, right? But maybe something surprising along your path.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, so not to kind of go too much into the kind of commercial strategy of Rumbo, but essentially what we're really focusing on is partnering with organizations that support our mission of making careers guidance more accessible. And what I think I was surprised by is how product market fit is partially, yes, about the product itself, but it's also about really understanding the commercial models of the businesses or the organizations you're trying to sell to. And that requires an extraordinary level of domain knowledge. And a lot of the time, this isn't stuff that can be, just looked up online. It's tacit knowledge that you find by speaking to people who have years and years of experience in the industry. And so when we're trying to understand, how we sell into a certain system, whether it's, some kind of government funded program or a higher education system, I think I went into the project thinking, okay, we can just, look it up. We can use AI and we can, figure it out. But actually, it's not that tends not to be the case. You need to build your network. You need to build relationships. You need to ask a lot of questions. It helps to have advisors. We're lucky that we've got a lot of, very, very experienced advisors. So, yeah, that was something that surprised me. Yeah, that's been the main thing, I think.
The very last question of the day, and I appreciate you taking the time and being
Hmm.
somehow grilled by this Q&A. Looking back, I know you wrote about the death of the corporate job, and it was this article going viral on Substack, and last time I checked, the number of reshares and likes was insane.
Hmm.
Is there anything you think you'd gotten from a traditional path that you had to learn the hard way instead? Is there anything that you believe maybe working a corporate job would have made me more successful, or would have given me that knowledge that I was actually lacking when I started Rumbo? And I promise I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. This is a genuine, curious
No, no,
question.
it's a good question. Hmm. Interesting. It depends because it depends what you want from your career. I think that I probably would have developed more patience working in a corporate job, dealing with the bullshit. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I think there is something I hear kind of anecdotally from people that work these types of jobs that there's a lot of kind of politics and a lot of very trying to put a positive spin on this, but that all of the game playing is really about understanding people, and I know that there's kind of sometimes perverse motives, but I do think that just being in an office, being around people all day. I'm on my own a lot of the time working would have helped me, understand relationships, understand people, manage people, all of those things. And I think as the business grows and if we, scale a team, just not having had really a kind of formal manager, I don't have too much of a frame of reference of what a business leader looks like. So, we'll see when we get there. Maybe that's not relevant to the type of business that we're trying to build, but yeah, that could be one. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe it'll crop up more a little bit later.
I genuinely wish that for you. And look, if anything, that's a good problem to have. That means that Rumbo will
Yeah,
be at the point where it can scale, and you will deal with that. You'll cross that bridge when you get there. Look, until
hopefully.
then, best of luck with what you're building. I think it's awesome. I think it can help a lot of people out there. And I know that you're working super hard. You're literally grinding on this day in, day out. So best of luck with that. Thank you so much for taking the time on the conversation today. And hopefully we get to do this again soon at some point.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Thanks so much.